Art Corner.
So here we are once again.
Hey Dennis.
Years later, we were trying to work out whether it was
4 years
before
later. I think it's 4 years
yeah,
later.
it was
or
before the
thereabouts.
pandemic that I saw you, and for the most part, everybody I've spoken to during, I always said to them, look, years later, I'll make reference to it, and we'd all be like, what on earth was that
What
about?
was that?
Yeah, what was that? But look, here we are, Morgan Howell. I like to call him AKA Supersize, but he told me it is Morgan, so we'll go with Morgan. As some of the viewers have probably realised, I had interviewed you before years ago. This is catch up, and this is just finding out interesting moments since the pandemic, and just take us away with how the pandemic affected you and what you've been up to.
Well, the pandemic was it's a really, really interesting time. I've been working for myself for donkey's years. You know, I ran an advertising agency for 25 years when the kids were growing up.
Yeah.
And all that time, I dreamt of having like a summer holiday. You know, having a few weeks off, just a sort of a bit of a full stop for a while.
Yeah.
To sort of think about things, and lo and behold, that's what happened. But unfortunately, it wasn't. You know, it was a very, very scary time for a lot of us. I think.
Indeed, it was.
And I had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, you know, I'm an artist full time. I rely on people buying my work to pay the bills, but also it's it's kind of my happy space as well.
Yeah.
And so the contemplative time during that period turned out to be really, really productive and really busy for me, because there were, you know, all sorts of people were working from home. They were spending more time with their family. They were thinking about what was important to them.
Yeah.
And it turns out that you know, music was one of the things that saved a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
And you know, people had a bit of money because they weren't going on holiday. They were probably doing up a room to turn into a home office or something like that. So actually, from a business point of view, I did really well.
That's fantastic.
During that time.
So basically, not a lot of change for you. This is where you kind of live in a sense during the day, right here in the studio.
Yeah. I do. But there was actually a really big change, because it was I had a book deal.
Oh.
And during that period, we published the book.
Right.
And the idea of the book was to sort of show as much of my work as I possibly could. You know, I think I had 95 pieces in the book.
Right.
But I work with Dominic Mohan, who's my agent.
Okay.
You'd probably
What was the book called?
It's called Morgan Howell at 45 RPM.
Okay, right.
I will show it to you in a minute. I've got a copy over there.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was that we were trying to get as many of the people that commissioned the work or own the work, and in some cases the customers didn't want publicity, so we had to get somebody else. But we got 95 people to write about 95 records.
Wow. So
we had access to a lot of bored people
who
ordinarily wouldn't have spoken to us, I don't think.
Gosh.
And you know, we like Andrew Marr wrote the foreword for our book.
Wow.
And Andrew, apart from we know him as a sort of a BBC correspondent and broadcaster, but actually he's a social historian.
Right.
And he'd had a terrible time. He'd lost his dad.
Right.
He wasn't able to go to his father's funeral. He'd gone to go and visit his mum up in Scotland somewhere, and he was having a very quiet time with his mum, trying to deal with that whole thing. And you know, our request drops into his email: Andrew, would you mind writing a foreword for this book? And he did.
Wow.
He wrote a beautiful piece for it, brilliantly written, really well observed.
Yeah.
Trying to sort of understand why these records mean so much to people.
Yeah.
How they mark your life, but also how they reflect society over the past sort of 50 or 60 years.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
you know, he wrote that, and also Sir Peter Blake wrote me a letter as well, which we used as a kind of like a second forward. Can you have a second forward?
Yeah.
Like a centre forward to the book. So yeah, we did that during lockdown. So I don't think the book would have come out in the way that it had, and we certainly wouldn't have had that access to people if it hadn't have been for that period of time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of changes for a lot of people. A lot of unexpected things happened, and a lot of career paths changed.
Yeah.
A lot of lives changed. You know, sadly, you know, a lot of people, you know, had to endure some very, very sad times. But I think, you know, it certainly it was certainly a marker for a lot of people.
See, what I've noticed in the last, let's say, and it's been continuous in terms of my observation, the last 20 years, is that there's been a real hark back, and it's not just a fleeting trend now, it's a real hark back to anything artisan, anything retro, all things attached to a certain quality of production.
Yeah.
And for me, that's why I think what's happened with your amazing idea with these 45s, that's what has stamped the popularity. And it's not going to go anywhere because everybody's looking back, not fleetingly, but just looking back pre-technology or high-end technology, and just recognising what's going on with quality. And even the way music's produced now, as you know. People are trying to replicate
analog.
And
yeah, I mean, I get this with my my kids who are in their sort of mid to late 20s. I mean, I guess I'm very lucky because I started working in advertising just prior to desktop publishing and computers and stuff. So my skill set coming out of art college and into the advertising world, I had to learn how to hand letter. I had to learn how to make things. I had to understand how materials worked. So I'm probably in a fairly narrow skill set of people who understand how those things work. But also I understand, you know, printing techniques. So, you know, how things work, you know, silk screens or various production methods over the years. So when it came to replicate those as an art piece, it comes across as being authentic.
Of course,
and there's something about the imperfection of stuff that we're kind of drawn to, really, where things are out of registration. This is a great example. You probably won't be able to focus on it, but this label
well,
here,
we can just do a little.
This is one of my additions. It's not the original piece, but the label of this Bethlehem piece, I've actually chosen to paint a Jamaican pirate copy.
Right.
So it would have been a stamp that somebody would have made, or a really kind of cheap reproduction. So it's off centre, and the paint's reacted against itself. So it's full of imperfections. But it kind of helps. It helps me honour Nina Simone's great song, and I could have done it very straight, and I could have done it in lots of different ways. But I only ever paint a song once, and this is what I chose to do. I saw some reference to this, and I thought that's the one. That's the one that I'm going to do. So I think. People want to read books. I'm hoping people will continue to buy newspapers and, you know, long form publishing, magazines, you know, read articles, read informed opinion rather than headlines and
And let's hope that print never dies. I mean, it's not dead yet. It's not dead in the water yet, but print has an amazing.
Well, I think that the real sort of quality publications will remain.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the top journalists are drawn to those.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And they'll kind of like stay with those publications, which will survive. But I do think that there will be a resurgence of that.
Yeah.
And
I hope so too.
I really hope that some sort of younger types will come in with the energy to sort of launch publications again, because they're people will want to read it.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're all getting bored with scrolling.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, what happens with a toddler now? Apparently, you hand them a book and they swipe the cover, right? So there's something clearly lacking there, isn't there? But you were referring earlier. You've got a new neighbour, an interesting neighbour. Right, so who's moved in the area?
Oh yeah, Kathy Valentine has moved in. Yeah, from the Go-Go's.
Right.
She just moved into town.
That's fantastic.
Watch her, Kathy. And she moved. I think she was in Austin prior to that. And she is going to be doing some dates. Her band are coming over and rehearsing. They've been talking to my son actually about some rehearsal space.
Right.
And there's a few sort of local musicians in town that we took her to a gig at the Mermaid the other day and introduced her to some local people. So watch this space. Maybe she'd be playing locally. That'd be cool.
Fantastic.
She's the bass player, the original bass player with the Go-Go's. Back from, I think they formed in '78 and she joined in 1980, but she got them the record deal.
Okay.
So she's an interesting lady. Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, the thing that's really resonated with me recently is just how many amazing legends in music we've lost in the last few years. And for me, it makes it ever more significant in terms of, the original analog production of the music that these people did. We've just lost so many. So, and I'm wondering whether you still, I mean, hopefully we're not going to lose them all in the next 5 years, but we've lost a lot. But you've met many of them, and who's resonated with you most recently in terms of me? You've met some amazing legends. We went through that the last time we spoke. But
I suppose not so much a musician, but Jill Furmanovsky, who's a great photographer. I did a Q&A with Jill just before Christmas at the Barbican.
Oh wow!
And I had met her before, but to be in conversation with her in front of an audience was quite cool.
Yeah.
And she's a lady that started shooting in the early '70s at the Rainbow.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
know it well.
So it was very much a man's world, and she was an inexperienced lady, borrowed her father's camera, I think, but managed to take some great photographs. And she went from shooting all of the great bands at the Rainbow to moving on to photographing Pink Floyd. So she took all the photographs of them at Abbey Road when they were recording Dark Side and Wish You Were Here. And then she moved on to the early punk scene. So in sort of 76, 77, she was shooting the early punk scene in New York and in the UK. Yeah. And then she went on to photograph Oasis. So she was in the Britpop era. Yeah. So it's fascinating talking to her. Yeah. So that's most recent times she's been the most interesting lady. Yeah. Wow. And, so we've sort of collaborated on a few things. Right. And so she's been the most interesting lady.
Gosh. So lastly, what I want to cover, you mentioned the Barbican.
Yeah.
And that whole ska movement is just everything to me. That's literally what accentuates my heyday.
It's all downhill from
Yeah,
there.
which is a long time ago. Yeah, and it has been a little bit downhill from there. In terms of anything you want to romanticize, nothing has been as high as that for me. But that is superb, and I love the Barbican for that, just
great.
keeping culture
Interesting
alive.
place.
But tell me a bit about that.
Well, so I have a kind of permanent revolving exhibition at the Barbican in the music
You
library.
do, right? That's good
For
to
the
know.
past 10 years or so. So
Oh.
whenever they have a show on, and I've had a couple of shows there myself.
Yeah.
But you know, whenever there's a show there, we have a discussion about what would be the most suitable piece to put
Oh,
on
that's
display.
great to know.
But then
Right.
when I found out that the two-tone thing was happening, and I also know Mark Baxter, Bax, who co-curates it with his friend Dave.
Yeah.
I can't remember Dave's surname, sorry Dave. But they've done a fantastic job of curating the show. The interesting thing about it is it's not just about the music, and it doesn't start with Windrush. It starts all the way back in about 1917.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting educated now.
Yeah, well, that's right. I think there were a lot of Caribbean West Indian soldiers, and they, if I remember rightly, they weren't given equal status, as you can imagine, in the army.
Yeah.
And they weren't treated particularly well, and they weren't paid the same amount. But one of our kings, I'd like to say George V.
Right.
Maybe.
Okay, your history is better than mine.
Okay, somebody like that.
Yeah.
Gave these guys their own regiment and their proper status and proper pay. And this was the beginning of the sort of Caribbean love affair with the UK. And they thought because this had happened, all of the other promises would be true as well. So, unfortunately it wasn't, was it? But what they've done brilliantly is they've taken two stories. So one of them is Rhoda Dakar from the Body Snatchers. They've taken her story and a guy called Tony Minviel, who's a DJ on Jazz FM. And you must go along to the show to see their parallel stories, talking about their families and how they ended up settling in the UK, and you know how their lives have been affected. But of course, you know, the benefit for everybody here has been the fantastic culture, the fashion, and the music of Caribbean music.
Incredible, yeah.
And I was again asked to be involved, and I'm lucky enough to have some artifacts from people that I've met. So Jerry Dammers from the Specials gave me one of the hand-stamped Gangsters singles.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's in the show. Chalky Davis, who photographed the Specials for the original Gangsters album, sent me a beautiful triptych of the original photographs before they were retouched.
Goodness me.
So that's in the show. And then I also had a photograph of Jerry Dammers, which is from the front cover of Mojo magazine, and that was taken by Tom Oldham, the great Mojo photographer, and he gifted that to me, so that's in the show as well. So some of my stuff's in the show. But I also I was trying to think of the most suitable record, and I didn't want to do the obvious thing and paint a Specials record. So I painted Al Capone. I painted Al Capone by Prince Buster, on Blue Beat. So that's what's on the wall. And when I was researching it, obviously Gangsters is a reworking of Al Capone. But do you know what the other side of Al Capone is?
Well, no.
One Step Beyond.
Oh gosh, really?
Yeah.
Gosh,
so,
okay.
Of course, you know, in 1979, Madness did their own version of One Step Beyond. So you have 200 miles apart,
Yeah.
The Specials in Coventry doing their version of Al Capone.
Yeah.
And in Camden, you know, the Specials in 1979 did One Step
Right.
Beyond. And this is, you know, is a distillation of everything that they've heard. And that's how, you know, the Caribbean music became, British music became our music. So it's a great show.
There is the ultimate history lesson right there. So just lastly, plug your website, your Instagram, and any upcoming shows.
Yeah.
For the future of this year. Just
okay.
Plug away.
Right. Well, I am going to be doing an artist in residence spell at the Barbican. I'm not quite sure when that's going to be, so you can check that out on my socials. I'm at Supersize Art on all of the socials.
Excellent.
So that's the next thing. I'm also in the middle of producing some really exciting silk screens, large scale silk screens of some of my editions which have sold out, so you can't buy them anymore as three-dimensional editions.
Yeah.
So I'm having these beautiful 8-colour silk screens produced by Coriander Studios, and Coriander's the studios where Peter Blake and you know, all the kind of like top artists have their silk screens done. So it's costing an arm and a leg, but it's the best place to, if you're going to do it, you know, do it well.
Yeah.
So there will be a show, probably a launch show somewhere in London coming up.
Right.
And I'll just grab that
And
book.
watch that space. Yes.
Off screen. So
yeah.
Here's the book that I produced with Dominic during lockdown, and you can see there's the letter from Peter Blake.
Yeah.
There's the foreword from Andrew Marr. This is me with my
foot
stomping.
We've seen that foot on your Instagram as well.
And basically, yeah, it goes through the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. There's and we have people like that's Johnny Marr that's written there about Metal Guru, so you know, various famous faces. So all good.
Amazing.
Brought to you by Art Corner.